Greetings, Crocodile Army. Today we're going to talk about race. Yeah, I know. Proceed with caution, white guy who wants to talk about race, right? Yeah, I'll do my best with it. So, I see a lot of posts that include news stories or memes or something related to racism committed by black people. Sometimes it's the usual conservative friends who I expect to see that from, but even some YouTube atheists promote that nonsense. Some will describe those stories as reverse racism, which I think is a bizarre thing to call it because it's not reverse anything, it's just racism by a different race other than Caucasians, which is simply racism. Racism isn't like matter and antimatter, where one race can cancel out the other. Showing that non-white races can be racist is both obvious and pointless. The reason for them feeling the need to point this out seems to be that they feel attacked when other white people do something racist and are called out for it. No act by an individual should be shared automatically by a group as their responsibility, and I've been very consistent in speaking out about that over the years. That goes for religion, politics, race, and more. Recruiters for racist groups prey on that fear of group culpability when they recruit, in fact. They want to make you believe that they as a race are under attack. This tactic tends to work best on the less educated, but it can work on anyone. I don't feel the least bit of personal guilt when someone does something awful to another person, no matter what it is, because it wasn't me doing it. I feel sympathy, of course, but I save my sympathy for the victims. Not any potential loss of status for my race, and certainly not for myself, and so should you. Searching out a story of injustice done to your race or done by another race to somehow compensate is just silly. It would only apply if someone claimed that racist acts done by another race were impossible. There were a lot of people who felt like they were being attacked in Beyoncé's performance at the Super Bowl a couple weeks ago, because it referenced being tired of all the unarmed black people being shot by police. There was some imagery related to the Black Panthers, which seemed to scare a lot of the Fox News crowd. In fact, they even promised a big protest in front of NFL headquarters in New York City, but approximately 0.0 people showed up, except for some counter-protesters who found nobody there to protest against. Even if you were to remove the couple incidents where there was no video, there have been many horrible cases in the last few years, including false statements by police and cover-ups, including the erasure of security recordings by the police in the Chicago case. Stack that on top of the business-as-usual sentencing differences for drugs and everything else over the decades, and it seems like there are plenty of legitimate gripes. So are all gripes around the issue of racism legitimate? That's a very silly question, but I do see it seriously asked sometimes. Of course, there are some gripes that I find to be nonsense, and of course it's okay to think that Al Sharpton and some other civil rights leaders are arrogant blowhards. The Oscars issue this year, for instance, seemed to be a lot more smoke than fire. I can't come up with a black actor or actress who I could easily say was robbed out of a nomination this year. I don't doubt that there's some institutional racism in the Oscars process, but with this year's movies it's hard to test the theory. There's nothing at all wrong with having an honest discussion about racism, as long as we're able to admit two things. One is that racism exists, and the second is that not talking about racism does not help it go away. Every time the media reports on an incident involving racism, I see the media being criticized for talking about it, or for not reminding people that it's not only white people who are racist. Which brings us right back to group culpability. If you saw Beyoncé's performance, you could say she was expressing her experiences as a minority, or you can take it as an attack on your race because you believe in group culpability, and then accuse her of being divisive because we're all Americans and we don't talk about unpleasant things like racism. If you hear studies about how people with names characteristic of non-white people are less likely to get job interviews with identical resumes, you could do two things. You can acknowledge that racism exists and try to consciously counter that force in yourself, or you can point out that black people do bad things too, like owning slaves or beating up white people, so it all cancels out, without having to put forth any effort. To ease your mind, if you're the type of person that needs this, I hereby absolve you of any guilt from anything that anyone else of your race has ever done. If you still find yourself reposting stories about other races being racist to help you feel better, ask yourself why, because if group culpability is not a shoe that fits you, then stop trying so hard to wear it.